Welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I talk to Treasurers about how they built their careers, where they are now, where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. This week's show, joined by Adrian Sargent, the founder of ESG Treasury. ESG are a relatively new company in the market, and they provide treasury advice and consultancy to organizations to help them provide sustainable solutions, if you like. Adrian's experience and that of his new team with the new company comes from what you might call the traditional world of corporate treasury, combining Adrian's passion for all things sustainable and sustainable financing with his 20 years plus of corporate treasury experience. And I know this very well because Adrian has worked a number of senior treasury roles at companies such as Morgan Stanley, HBOS, Tesco Bank, where I really got to know Adrian because I actually took him from HBOS. Sorry, HBOS. I placed him there as the head of ALM, or Asset and Liability Management, for those of you who don't know, into Tesco Bank. And then he moved on to BlackRock. And his most recent position before ESG and setting up this was actually with Virgin Money. And Virgin Money, he then decided actually ESG Treasury is where it is, sustainable financing stuff. He will explain that all to us throughout the program. Adrian, it's your turn, as I say every week. Tell us about your career to date, if you would, and how you maybe first started in the world of Treasury. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And very pleased to be on the podcast today. So, my career is spanned over 20 years so far, but it started out in accountancy. Like many people in Treasury that I know, accountancy was the bedrock on which it was based, and also then moved across to look at Treasury. So I actually started out in brewing.
Nice.
So I didn't want to be a typical accountant in a big four or big five or big six at the time accountancy firm. I wanted to get really stuck in with the business that did something. I moved from brewing and accountancy and brewing to Treasury, and quite a significant shift from brewing in Edinburgh to investment banking in London. And I moved into a sort of treasury controller's role there. So again, on the accountancy side, but my treasury interest was ignited through internal audit and auditing the treasury function of Scottish and Newcastle,
Okay.
as it was. And that was many moons ago.
Yeah.
But I got an interest there, and I could see that it was a sort of a dynamic area to work. It was challenging. It was interesting. There was lots of things to keep the brain ticking over. So, if I look at Treasury overall, then, I think Treasury really is at the heart of organisations. I think historically it's perhaps been undervalued. The financial crisis 10 or so years ago now really brought Treasurers' skills and knowledge and experience to the fore, particularly in banking, but for the other corporates as well. It's key, and many treasurers will consider cash to be king, but there's many other facets there as well. So you have to look after the cash, but you really need to get into the detail of the organisation. And I see treasurer roles very much as a strategic partner to the rest of the business. So from that investment banking side of things, back in Morgan Stanley in London, I had a family wanting to relocate back to Edinburgh, and I've moved around different banks and financial organisations, should I say, actually ever since. And the things that have really interested me have been change and driving things forward and building teams and building functions. So I found that I've had a passion for building, changing things over the years. So my expertise so far, as you mentioned before, looking to drive forward the environment, social governance agenda there, and drive forward sustainable finance, and use my treasury expertise, as well as the network of partners and associates that I've built up, having done a lot of research in this area, to help companies, corporates, and financial institutions to move into the sustainable economy.
Yeah, and with that, we'll just go back to HBOS days, because you were, one thing I would say about all of Adrian's career is you sort of got these wider leadership roles, but looking at, not just Treasury in isolation. You've very much sorted out a lot of the pieces of the puzzle and got people talking to each other. I know you said he did that when they moved you from there and, to Tesco's and things. But with HBOS, you had this wider role. What was that like? Sort of massive organisation and lots of different interesting roles there. But HBOS, massive group. How did you get on with that?
Yeah, so HBOS was my first role back in Scotland, having left Morgan Stanley. And I joined HBOS a year after Halifax and Bank Scotland came together. So again, it was a time of change. And I had a number of different roles there, which were interesting and challenging. And we were very much sort of looking at the post-merger, bringing the right structure in place and getting the right controls in place, linking in with the overall strategy and the risk management. So a lot of the roles there were very much focused on asset liability management, either overseeing different parts of the group or actually doing it for different divisions of the group. And there was a lot of interesting elements there where you needed to get into the detail to understand the business, understand the products, understand their strategy, to then pull out what the different risks were there and then assess whether or not the current processes were aligned and effective. And then if they weren't, then you need to challenge and go to the various MDs and chief execs of the different areas and the CFOs and say, look, there is something here. I believe there is a risk here. I've done some scenario analysis. Here's some recommendations for reducing the risk, changing the products, and the like. And that's when the interesting debates start as well. But interesting enough, one of my last roles at HBOS was in group strategy. So I've always had a view to developing myself. I've had a view to challenging myself as well, and I've had a view to giving things a go. So my last role at HBOS was giving it a go in group strategy. There was a couple of roles that became available in that small team. So there was about 8 or 9 people in the total group strategy area. So I was in there as the treasury expert at the time, just before the financial crisis. So, it was a very interesting area there to be talking to the senior executives in the firm and the group treasurer and others about how do we protect the balance sheet, how do we protect the liquidity, how do we make sure that the overall strategy is working well. Obviously, it was a difficult time and Lloyds eventually bought HBOS.
Yeah.
But, having worked through that, it was very interesting to see the exec working and the different decisions that were being made through that particular sort of crisis point, as well as the financial markets were going through, one would say, a turbulent time.
You moved on from that to the newly established at that time Tesco Bank. So you were sort of developing it, though they had some stuff. That was a carve out, as it were. And that's when we first met and everything else. Talk us through maybe the sort of, you're going into a fresh setup. What was your pick list? What was your top priorities? Again, because people listening might be going in similar situations. What would you say is, look, these are the key things to keep at the front of your mind, sort of thing?
Tesco was a joint venture with the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Tesco then bought out the Royal Bank of Scotland share. But because it was Royal Bank of Scotland, the Royal Bank of Scotland ran all the systems, ran all the processes. And so when I joined, I think there were 3 or 4 people in Treasury at that particular time, and we relied very heavily on the RBS systems and processes to supply data. So very much it was a setup from scratch of all the processes you need to do. So I had the title of Head of Asset Liability Management at Tesco Bank, but that involved looking at the flow of data to understand what the different liquidity risks were, what the different interest rate risks were, making sure I can understand what the overall strategy is, looking at ILAPs and ICAPs, which are capital and liquidity assessments that you do for the regulator, as well as diverse as looking at securitization and bringing the securitization sort of understanding through and developing that team as well. So it was a very challenging time, but it was very rewarding as well, because it was an exciting time to be building something new. At the time, Tesco Bank was very much one of the key players, one of the key initial challenger banks, looking to shake up the banking market, looking to put customers first, and all that good stuff. So it had a very good purpose in sort of looking after customers and shaking up the banking, or what was sort of deemed a stale banking market at that particular time.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would say, having been through a build phase in a sort of dynamic environment, and we had the regulator talking to us a lot through that particular time, largely because it was just after the financial crisis. There was lots of new regulation coming. They were very concerned that there was going to be other banks that were going to fail. So therefore, one of the things as you're going through a really busy period, I would always say it's always important as an individual to sort of make sure you look up from the day job and make sure you realise that although you're hopefully having a great time, because it's exciting and interesting work, that you also need to remember that there is life outside work as well. So one of the things I learned through that particular sort of phase was I was very engrossed in the work that I was doing. There was a lot to do. It was exciting. It was dynamic. But what I perhaps, looking back, what I perhaps didn't do was actually sort of lift my head up from the parapet and or above the parapet and just sort of look at what was going on around me in my own personal life as well. So, one of the things there was that I was working very hard through that, but you need to sort of just take time and take stock and remember that you've got a life outside.
Get your balance and get the balance right as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So then you made the move to BlackRock. Good role. International. There's a bit more international than perhaps the Tesco role. Obviously not as international, but you've got that great international experience. Talk us through BlackRock.
Yeah, so BlackRock obviously is a very large and influential organisation. So, I had the opportunity to join as the International Treasury Director there. So I looked after the Treasury operations basically outside the Americas. And it was a growing organisation. It had grown quickly following the financial crisis through some significant acquisitions. It today is obviously one of the major preeminent financial institutions of the world with significant influence and significant investments in a lot of companies. But one of the items there is, you can run an international treasury operation from a desk in Edinburgh, and with technology these days, you can communicate around the world. So you can have the right information flow, you can have the right influence. You just simply have to make sure you're a little bit flexible on the timing of those things to make sure you can talk to all parties around the world as necessary. One of the things I did find there was that with Tesco, I was at the head office and I was engaged. I occasionally went along to see the CEO, had some issues. I could pop along and see the CFO. That people were very, very local and very, very handy to see. What I found personally with BlackRock at the time and the role I had there, that you had to be very, very independent. I reported into the group treasurer who was in Manhattan, New York, and that was 4,500 miles away. So there was a time zone difference. You had to be very independent there as well, which was fine. I enjoyed that element. I enjoyed the responsibility of being able to look after the items I was assigned and do what I thought necessary for that. What I missed, though, was that sort of engagement with the senior exec or being at the heart of an organisation. So when I reflected back with both HBOS and also Tesco, is that there was that ability to feel engaged, because Morgan Stanley as well, actually reflecting there, Morgan Stanley was growing a lot. So, although it was a US organisation, when I was at Morgan Stanley as well, they were growing significantly. There was engagement with the CFO there about strategy, about understanding how things were developing. The treasurer was very, very handy as well when it moved from the financial controller role into the treasury roles. So therefore, there was that engagement and feeling part of that drive forward. On reflection, what I found with BlackRock is that you were just a bit further remote. It's important for me, or what I've learned over the years, it's important for me to feel engaged and be truly at the heart of the organisation, rather than as a sort of perhaps a satellite office, albeit a large satellite office. So.
And then with yourself, you sort of made the move you joined Virgin Money as the Treasury Operating Officer. Perhaps talk about Virgin Money and then how it's then led to this, because you've been there 6 years, and then it's sort of the next role for you, which I think is fantastic actually, and we'll really bring out in the rest of the show. But sort of the move to Virgin, great organisation. What's it been like there?
Virgin, again, took me back to when I was at Tesco in many respects, not only because there were some similar individuals there at Virgin. Virgin was an Edinburgh-based head office. It had the right aspirations and the right purpose. It was UK-centric. It was Edinburgh-centric. So when I reflected back on the BlackRock, I could become more engaged again with driving the business forward or understanding that drive forward as well. And the role of the Treasury Officer was broad, which also gave me a lot of items there in order to be interesting. So, I joined Virgin Money back in 2014, and its balance sheet has grown significantly. So, it grew. I think it was around about 12 billion when I joined, and it then grew to over 40 billion. And then Clydesdale Bank took over Virgin Money as well, and now the overall group is at 90 billion. So you can see there that it's obviously an exciting period to be with a company that's growing. It's also your ability to be engaged because you're close to the senior management, and the board and the executives there as well is engaging, and it gives you that drive, purpose there to really be engaged. So over those 6 years, seen a lot of change. Again, regulation has changed in the banking sector. There's new regulation coming out all the time, which adds some challenges to weave that into the operating model. But also, to look at how to stabilize, how to manage teams, how to make sure that you're understanding the overall strategy of the group and how that's impacting the treasury responsibilities of liquidity and interest rate risk and credit risk and all those different elements there is very interesting. And the role of the treasury officer spanned many different areas there as well. So it gave me that ability to be engaged and proactive across the piece there. So that was really a very interesting role. And actually, when I reflect back, I've changed roles reasonably frequently. I think for many individuals, if I reflect back at my HBOS days, 5, 6, or even 7 different roles. I think over that sort of 7-year period I was at HBOS, and I just found it interesting to take on new challenges there. And although I was Treasury and Operations Officer for 6 years, there were significant challenges through that period that kept me interested and made the role varied and diverse as well. Yeah. So things from developing teams to system selections to organizational design were some of the aspects that I got involved with there, which just kept it interesting and exciting.
We're going to move into, Adrian's, next evolution, if you like, in sustainable financing and things like that, and why he's got passion for that. But just whilst we're in that sort of world of you've done all these different roles with really interesting organisations, HBOS, well-known name and everything else. Obviously, you then got bought out, but you've still got big corporate names. We've got, just in the past few days in the news, you've got a fintech is out there buying a bank. So it's sort of the poacher, gamekeeper, all that sort of comparison. And there's this massive amount of change in the banking market that, perhaps the banking market hasn't really changed externally for that long. Internally, that it's had to. I know that we do some banking recruitment, more for not necessarily the big players, because a lot of the time they use the big recruitment companies. And when they say, look, we need someone recruited for Vanquis Bank, the group treasurer there, National Bank of Kuwait, a number of big roles, but interesting companies and everything else. But now there's this sort of change in the market. This not sea shift, but where are you seeing it? I know we didn't discuss this before the show, but what are your quick thoughts on that sort of thing for a moment?
The fintech is an interesting one because, my experience with sort of banks that are growing and developing, it's a difficult play because if you think about how a bank grows, a bank needs to be funded. So therefore, they need to raise that funding from somewhere. If it's a retail bank, it needs to raise it from the retail customers. And the market is such that in order to raise the funding, you need to pay a high deposit rate to your sort of retail customers. So therefore, you can grow your funding in that way. But also, if you're going to sort of your lending book, say mortgages is a prime example. In order to lend money to mortgage customers, you need to be at the bottom of the market, i.e. a low rate, so top of the league table, which means a low interest rate for the customers. So the perennial issue with any challenger bank coming in and any new entrant there is very much they need to get critical mass in order to make a profit. Because quite often, if you look at the league tables of deposits and mortgages, then the rates could be quite similar. Yeah. And there's no margin in between that to actually pay for staff and all the running costs of a bank. Or it's difficult. So, the key thing here is that there's an evolution of the technology there. I know that a couple of the sort of larger banks, for instance, Royal Bank of Scotland have got Bow, which is a new challenge bank. So a lot of the larger banks are looking at technology and saying, well, how do we build our own tech bank? And therefore they could perhaps transition their current customers across to that new technology. So, it's an interesting dilemma there in order to grow scale. I think there has to be some unique proposition from the sort of the fintech elements where they are able to get the funding at the right price and lend out at a higher margin in order to generate the returns to basically pay for all the operations technology and people, as well as do a return to investors as well. So, it's a challenging space for the new entrants there.
Yeah.
And I can see that, through the fintech revolution or evolution, there's a number of some larger institutions will be looking at which ones they should buy to incorporate into their own estates.
Yeah, bolt in and sort of integrate and everything else, to sort of keep up with things as well.
It's just on that. If you look at a lot of the larger institutions have got large legacy technology.
Yes.
It's a burden, should we say, there. So, a lot of the cost of transition is moving the data and moving to new platforms there as well. So that's one of the other key challenges there.
Apologies, it was just whilst we were on the phone because I've got Adrian here, so that's why I wanted to ask him. It just sort of occurred as breaking news, as it were. So that was one of the reasons I thought, God, I've got someone that actually knows this space better than I do, really. And that's actually why I wanted to ask Adrian. But one of the things that Adrian's doing from here is you're springboarding into something fresh, new. We saw a great speech, which I think we've got a link to, or we'll put a couple of links in the show notes to some of the interviews you've done about sustainable financing. Can you explain to me what ESG is, rather than just three letters, and what you're going to do with it? What is this, and why should people contact you?
ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance.
What does that mean?
It's the umbrella sort of three-letter acronym, you could say, that is there for doing the right thing for the environment. So climate change is obviously the big thing there that is there for the environmental. So making sure that you're doing the right thing by improving the environment, greenhouse gas emissions, making sure they're controlled, carbon offsetting, all those sort of key things that you're hearing in the press these days. On the social side of things, that's all about doing the right thing for perhaps socially deprived areas, or if you take a large mining company, making sure they're looking after the environment around that particular mine site and doing the right thing there for the social impact of business. And then governance is the element where you're basically running companies that are well governed. You've got diverse boards, you've got the right structure in place to make sure that things are challenged, you've got the right number of non-execs, all that stuff. So ESG really is that overarching banner of, I like to say, doing the right thing. So if you think about, say, taking things out of the environment, mining or oil, then you need to make sure you're putting things back. So you're planting trees and you're putting things back into society where you're mining. One of the key things there is it links to, I don't know if people have heard about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So they were developed a couple of years ago, and there are 17 goals there. And the United Nations said, look, we really want the world to develop and look after people, look after the environment, and basically sort of make the world a better place. So environmental social governance is underpinned and supported through United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And it's all about doing, what I like to say is doing the right thing there. So I've always had a desire to help, put it that way. And what I sort of want to do now is I want to use my Treasury experience to try and help corporates and banks or any organization move to the sustainable economy. So, I've done a dissertation recently with the Association of Corporate Treasurers. So I've done the Advanced Diploma in Treasury Management recently and passed that. So I'm about to be a fellow of the Association of Corporate Treasurers. Through that dissertation, I focused on sustainable finance, and I've got a lot of contacts now, a lot of partners working with, and trying to drive forward the sustainable economy and sustainable finance. So one of my beliefs is that where possible, corporates and banks should issue finance through the sustainable route.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they should link the debt they're raising to improving the green elements, the environmental elements of the organization, or the social elements. And they can do it via refinancing, or even better, for new initiatives that are there, and help companies and banks and the overall economy transition to that sustainable economy. And one of the things, if we look to the future, one of the things I hope is that sustainable finance will be the norm. Therefore, debt that's issued or loans that are granted, the norm will be that they're sustainable, they're green, they're social, or they're green and social, which is a sustainable element where you're bringing those two together. Non-sustainable finance will become the smaller party in the market, and therefore it will be sustainable finance as the norm.
And then with that, being green is key and everything else, but why do people need help to do this? Surely they can just do this themselves. They can go out to the market and buy a green bond, or they can just raise the funds like this and, well done, you've ticked that box. Is that what it's like?
Well, it's a little bit complex at the minute. So the marketplace is not yet homogenized, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
There's various what we call accreditors, so that there are various institutions that rubber stamp a bond issuance to say that it is green. But it can be quite a complex marketplace out there as well. So therefore, what I hope to do is be able to guide people through that particular marketplace, understand the different nuances, use the partners that I've got as well to help companies change. So one of the key elements there, and when I say different partners, there are a couple that I'm working with that have been doing sustainability for decades. And the key there is if you can actually issue sustainable finance and issue debt in the marketplace, you need to make sure it's aligned to your overall corporate strategy as well. So it is a bigger change for the corporate or the bank to make sure that they're aligning their overall corporate strategy in support of that finance as well. So it's where, again, the treasurer can be key and instrumental in the overall strategy of the organisation. And one of the interesting facts I dug out and has been publicised more recently as well is that actually there is significant demand for sustainable finance in the market. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you're likely to have cheaper issuance costs, sort of lower spread, and a bigger or greater diversity of both debt and equity investors as well. So there are some very clear benefits for the company of issuing, and therefore also protecting the longevity and sustainability of the institution itself.
So with treasurers, if they're thinking about it now, they're sort of sitting around saying, look, we must do something about this. They sort of contact you. What's the process, if you like, if that's the right way to do it? As you're starting to discuss it with them, they're saying, right, what are the key things they need to be thinking about? Is it the funding profile, or what? How would you describe? What's the sort of typical, without giving too much, because I know this is why they'd employ you, Adrian. But what sort of what's the thought process for a treasurer sitting at the desk now, maybe listening to the podcast on the way into work? Actually, that's something we need to look at. What do they need to think about first?
Yeah, so I've got three key principles that I think about.
Right.
I think about strategy, process, and review. So you've got to think about alignment with the strategic goals of the organisation. So if you're looking at sustainable finance, does that align to the goals of the organisation? There's a number of examples where, say, oil companies issue green finance, but that's actually contradictory in its own right. The market is moving from black to green, so understanding what that means and sort of, I'm very happy to talk to anybody about that. I'm passionate about this, so I enjoy talking about it. So what does it mean? How big's the market? What's the opportunity in the market? Where's the market going? So that's a strategy. So understand the strategy of the organisation and also Treasury. For the process you need to go through then, you can't just issue finance and issue debt if you don't need it. So do you need to issue debt? Do you need to refinance some debt that's maturing? So identify the need. You need to then establish the criteria that you're looking to meet. So if you're looking at greening your company, then how are you going to do that? What are you going to do it with? Why is it going to be green? Making sure it goes through that accreditation process. So there's a number of accreditation providers out there. So there's a requirement there to do a sort of an RFI, RFP, to choose one, make sure it's aligned to your own company's goals, and you get on with individuals there as well. And then there's also what sort of debt do you want to issue? Do you want to issue medium-term note? Do you want to go down the securitization route? What's the right debt for the organisation, and what's the market for that debt as well? And then the third thing of review is you've got to make sure that you set up the right process to continually validate that debt you've issued is still financing green and social development and causes that you've set out in your prospectus. So you've got to make sure that you're doing that on a regular basis, and also you've got to make sure you get that assurance on an annual basis as well to make sure that you still maintain credibility. So overall, there's a piece here where you need to maintain credibility of the debt that you've issued and alignment to the overall strategy of the organisation. So as I say, there's three core principles that I think about: the strategy, the process, and then the continuous review.
And you're at the early stages, that's right, but it's still an evolving space, and sort of it's early days. And, because 10 years ago, didn't even exist. We weren't talking about it, I don't think, in the certainly weren't talking in Treasury terms, nothing I'd ever heard of and things. And then suddenly it sort of come to the mainstream. That's now. Where do you see it developing to? Before we sort of look back over your career and sort of summarize that as we approach the end of today's show, but where do you see the future of green finance and everything else, sustainable finance, as it were?
So, I mean, if you look back then, you're right. It's just over 10 years ago when this sort of market started to develop. Sustainable bonds, there's now over 1 trillion sustainable bonds being issued. But if you look at the overall bond market, and, that's a small fraction of the overall bond market. So, I see that as investment is required and as a transition to the sustainable economy, putting the environment first and making sure you look after the social factors, then I actually see there is a huge opportunity for sustainable finance to be mainstream. So, you're looking at, the significant amount of the market moving to sustainable finance, and that being the norm. The new issuance is expected to top $1 trillion annually in the early 2020s. It needs to in order to support the greening and the climate change elements there as well. So, there is a piece there where this will become mainstream over the next 4, 5, 6 years is a sort of my expectation there. And, it's an exciting area to be in. So, there's this huge opportunity there, and there's a number of companies that are leading the way. So I've got a number of examples of companies who are leading the way and excited about, environmental, social governance, doing the right thing, sustainable finance. So I believe it's key there to get behind this and make sure that we do the right thing for ourselves and for our children.
So to wrap up today's show, as we do each week, we'll put your links to, what Adrian's doing now and his new company and everything else. So I'm sure there'll be people and some links to some of the videos, which I think are great. But you look back over your career, someone comes in and says, do you know what? That's great. From coming from audit through Morgan Stanley, investment banking, Tesco, BlackRock, there's just great names there. And they look back and they say, that's the sort of history I'd like. Or, they might be halfway there and say, yeah, I'd like to follow that. What are the sort of key tips, career tips you would give, maybe some of the junior candidates, mid-level, and then the senior guys, if they're thinking, actually, feel similar things. What sort of would you say?
I would say give it a go, and learn. So give it a go and learn are the two key things that have sort of stayed with me through my career. I like to be in exciting, interesting areas. I like to challenge myself. Sometimes I put myself in rather challenging positions, and setting up my own company will be my next challenging position to put myself through. So it's important. I also believe to continue to learn. So I've obviously recently done the advanced diploma. I wanted to make sure I consolidated my understanding there, but also I got the opportunity to do the dissertation and really focus on a particular area that I was interested in. So continue to learn, continue to challenge, and don't be afraid to give things a go. And, everyone needs to learn through some point. And, I believe that, the skills a treasurer or treasury professionals have can be applied to various different issues within business. So give it a go, continue to learn.
Well, there you go. I'm not even going to repeat those. A great little summation of today's show. Thank you for today. I think, again, a lot of people will be really interested in some of the stuff you're doing. So feel free to connect to Adrian. I think there's a lot more to come from Adrian and moving forward with sustainable financing. I think it's really interesting what he's doing. So feel free to connect to him from, the LinkedIn profile that we'll put in the show notes. Adrian, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, sir.